Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. The first item of business is general questions. At question number 1, I call Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on improvements on the A75.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The Scottish Government recognises the strategic importance of the A75 and we're committed to improving safety, resilience and reliability for everyone who uses this key route. A number of improvements are being delivered on the A75, including the introduction of signalisation at the Cuckoo Bridge roundabout, which is expected to get underway this year. Design and assessment work to consider options for realigning the A75 trunk road with bypasses at the villages of Springholm and Crocketford is also underway and proceeding at pace, and this work will culminate in the identification of a preferred route option for the scheme in early 2027.
Finlay Carson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that update, but the honest truth is the SNP have failed to invest in this road, and we've heard about a traffic light upgrade. In reality, the bypasses at Crocketford and Springholm are being funded by the UK Government, which means it's quite incredible that the Cabinet Secretary refused to meet with the local MP to discuss it. But in light of yet another accident in A75, this time near Gatehouse, which forced another closure, and following the tragic fatal crash earlier this month near Castle Douglas, on top of the daily near misses because of poorly designed junctions at the Hockavar and Twynham, how can the Scottish Government continue to justify its chronic underinvestment in this vital arterial route through Dumfries and Galloway? After a decade of inaction, is now not the time to commit to a fully costed, time-bound upgrade plan for the A75 to ensure the safety and economic viability of the local communities in the wider UK that it serves?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I am aware of recent incidents, most recently just yesterday in the Ardwall area. I have asked my Transport Scotland officials to work with local communities on the A75 in order to identify other improvements that can be made. But I will iterate in terms of the investment that he raises that since 2007 we have completed 6 major roads improvement projects along the A75 with a value of over £50 million and invested over £152 million to ensure its safe and efficient operation.
Brief supplementary, Colin Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. The reality is, Cabinet Secretary, the only investment on the table for meaningful upgrade work is from the UK Government for those bypasses at Crocketford and Springholm. So how much does the Scottish Government plan to invest in upgrade work going forward, given that roads are ultimately the responsibility of this Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
Recommendation 40 of SPR2 identifies the importance of continued investment and improvement in that area. We're almost damned if we do and damned if we don't. If we cooperate with the UK government, we're getting attacked from it. You want cooperation or do you not want cooperation? In terms of the issues, I think the A75 strategic importance, particularly in relation to traffic with to Northern Ireland and also onwards to the Republic of Ireland, is really important. It's why I raised it with other UK ministers, including the Northern Ireland Transport Minister, when I met with them at the British Irish Council Transport Ministers meeting in Belfast very recently. So I do take this very seriously. I am engaging, and members will have to decide if they want cooperation or no cooperation.
Question number 2, Jamie Halcro Johnston.
To ask the Scottish Government what measures it has introduced in the last year to improve road safety across the Highlands and Islands.
Cabinet Secretary.
Over the past year, the Scottish Government has implemented a range of measures to improve road safety across the Highlands and Islands. These include £1.7 million for targeted engineering improvements on the A9 and £14 million for local authorities to improve road safety and introduce 20 miles per hour limits where appropriate. In 2025-26, a further £48 million will support a further range of measures, including national driver behaviour campaigns, targeted infrastructure improvements and safety camera deployments. This includes £20 million for local authorities to make local roads safer and complete the rollout of 20 miles per hour limits. Collectively, these efforts are designed to reduce the number of people being killed or seriously injured on roads across Scotland, including the Highlands and Islands.
Jamie Halcro Johnston.
Those of us who use the A9 or any of the other major or smaller roads across the Highlands and Islands will be well aware that visitor numbers are already increasing ahead of the summer. This time last year, I asked the Transport Secretary about some of the specific issues caused by campervan drivers, those using e-bikes and other visitors who are unfamiliar with roads which are often challenging and too often in a poor state of repair. So, is the Transport Secretary confident that the Scottish Government is doing enough to improve road safety across the Highlands and Islands in particular? And will she reassure me that she believes that my constituents are safer on our roads this year than they were last?
Cabinet Secretary.
So in relation to his concern about visitors, it gives me the opportunity, and I thank him for the question, to announce that we launched our Drive on the Left campaign this week. It provides clear practical advice for overseas drivers, including how to use passing places, navigate junctions, and the importance of staying alert and keeping left, particularly when roads are quiet. These resources are available on the Road Safety Scotland website, and we're working with tourism and hospitality sectors, including vehicle rental companies, to help visitors remain safe. And I would encourage him and indeed all constituency MSPs and indeed regional MSPs who have visitors in their area to please share that campaign material.
Brief supplementary, Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. One of the challenges in the Highlands and Islands is that there are many people who drive on single-track roads who are not used to doing so, and frustration builds when there's a mix of people travelling too slowly and those that are driving too fast. So as we head towards another busy summer season, what advice would the Cabinet Secretary offer drivers in the Highlands, on our islands and elsewhere in rural Scotland?
Secretary.
So I would ask the member also to share the materials I was just talking about. I think it's all road users, and I think the point about it's those that live here as well as visitors need to be safe. We recognise that rural and island routes, especially single track roads, can be challenging for those unfamiliar with driving there. Rapid weather changes, quiet stretches, she talks about driver frustration, and unfamiliar layouts add to risk. That's why driver behaviour and the communications we are working on, and I would encourage everyone to promote the materials that I referred to.
Question number 3, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether the roadworks on the M8 in Glasgow will be completed by 2026.
Cabinet Secretary.
The M8 Woodside Viaduct is a complex project which involves constructing temporary propping in a constrained urban environment to enable repairs to the half joints which support the motorway. Transport Scotland and their contractor Amy have been examining each and every activity required to complete the works to ensure completion as soon as possible. However, there have been delays to the piling work around the subway tunnel, which has to be carried out very carefully. This information was explained to elected members, including Ms McNeill, when they attended for a site visit and were briefed by the Transport Scotland project team. Uncharted obstructions have recently been discovered, and officials are assessing these to determine if they might impact on the current estimated completion dates. I will, of course, notify the public of any changes to the project timeline when they are known. I acknowledge the disruption being experienced by the travelling public and local community and appreciate the patience of road users. However, this work is essential to ensure the safety and the longevity of this section of the M8 for the approximately 150,000 road users who travel on this section on that motorway daily.
McNeill. The M8 project was due for completion in late 2023, and since 2021 those using the M8 have had constant delays as part of their daily commute, and this also impacting on the West of Scotland economy. We know the project is complex, and I'm glad the Cabinet Secretary has acknowledged the impact on the public, but these works are advertised as being complete at early 2026 on the website. So is the Cabinet Secretary at all concerned about Transport Scotland writing to me on the 21st of May, who now do not confirm the completion date, which is what I think the Cabinet Secretary is saying today, but the website says early 26. It's unacceptable that the public putting up with these delays are not getting up-to-date, accurate information. In fact, the website is just a showcase for Amy as far as I can see. So will the Cabinet Secretary tell us and the public what has been done to bring the project in on scheduled time or as soon as possible? Obviously, that would include overtime or anything else. Cabinet Secretary. I'm more than happy to ask officials to make sure the website is up to date. I've explained the recent issues, particularly around unanticipated concerns around that. I think what is unacceptable is to question the work that is required to ensure that this work is carried out safely. As of May 2025, props have been installed at 13 out of a total of 23 locations. 10 locations have been fully jacked, meaning that the load from the bridge deck is being transferred away from the existing supports and onto the newly installed propping system. I understand members' request and interest in this. It's why I personally asked that MSPs and councillors were updated, and I am more than happy to arrange further briefing of Ms McNeill from officials as she's had previously. Thank you. Just ask members for concise questions and responses. Go to question number 4 and call Tim Eagle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I apologise? I was slightly late into the chamber today. To ask the Scottish Government what feedback it has received from organisations, including sports and social clubs, regarding changes in the Protecting Vulnerable Groups scheme as a result of the Disclosure Scotland Act 2020.
Minister Natalie Donovan.
Disclosure Scotland engages regularly with sectors using its services. Feedback received covers a range of areas related to the PVG scheme, highlighting needs, questions and addressing what works well. The PVG scheme does cover a diverse stakeholder base, some of which have unique needs and concerns. But feedback is continuously addressed and has led to the provision of additional guidance for certain sectors, alongside training workshops and a dedicated stakeholder engagement function.
Tim Eagle.
I thank the Minister for an early discussion on this. A number of clubs have contacted me about a potentially unintended consequence of the changes to the PVG rules. We are fortunate to have many young people who support sports and social clubs before they are aged 16, but they must have a PVG in place as soon as they reach 16, and there is some confusion as to when they can apply for that, with clubs worried they will have to ask young people to stop volunteering potentially for a period of months before a PVG is approved. Does the Minister agree with me that we don't want to discourage young people from volunteering, and can she clarify the latest from Disclosure Scotland as to when 16-year-olds can apply for a PVG and how that is being communicated to clubs?
Minister.
And I'd like to provide that clarity today. In response to feedback, Disclosure Scotland has developed an exceptions process to allow children to apply for PGB membership from 15 years and 8 months, so it's active from their 16th birthday to stop what Mr Eagle has referred to happening. This is available across all sectors, including sports, and was put in place to support young people who leave school and move into a regulated role as their chosen career or a further education pathway, which can include training or work in sports coaching. The exceptions process requires that the child makes a paper application, and this will be processed to commence from their 16th birthday. But as a result of what Mr Eagle has raised with me today, we will look at the guidance and work with VSDS on the information being provided to ensure that it reflects an accurate position.
Thank you. Question number 5, Richard Leonard.
To ask the Scottish Government how its policies to support Scottish culture and heritage ensure that the contribution of prominent figures such as trade unionist Michael McGahey can be honoured.
Cabinet Secretary.
The 2023 Culture Strategy for Scotland aims to extend the view of culture to include the everyday and emerging, the established and more formal, recognising each community's own local cultures and encouraging collaboration across partners to realise the transformational power of culture. It is by recognising that culture and heritage brings us together, celebrates our achievements and reminds us of our shared past that communities can also examine the contribution of key figures at the centre of our history, such as Michael McGahey, who was an early champion of this Parliament. The Scottish Government has demonstrated our commitment to the culture sector and heritage sector with an increase of over £34 million in 25-26, and this takes us to over £50 million more in culture funding than in 2023-24.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today marks the centenary of the birth of Mick McGahey. Born in Shotts on this day in 1925, he described himself as a product of his movement and his class. Self-educated, internationalist in outlook, never afraid to hide his politics. Isn't this a life to be celebrated? Aren't these values to be revered? So what is the Scottish Government going to do to nurture future generations of trade unionists and to ensure that working class history is properly recognised in our cultural heritage and properly taught in our education system? And wouldn't our politics today benefit from a bit more of the principle, the honour, all of his life?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his tribute to Michael McGahey on the anniversary of his birth. I do recognise his role. Indeed, as a young nationalist, I engaged with McGahey on a personal basis in terms of dialogue and debate, and he took time to listen, he took time to debate, and I think our politics would be far better if there was more listening, more engagement and understanding of people from different persuasions. I also recognise that there are existing monuments. I was very struck by the monument that's in the George V Park in Bonnyrigg, unveiled in 2006. It's a very simple, rough-hewn block of stone. It has a low relief profile of Michael McGahey and a dedication which includes his quote, "We are a movement, not a monument." So the member's recognition that trade unions, education, all different aspects, these are all part of our culture and our heritage, and I would encourage everyone to recognise that the Scotland that we want is a Scotland that embraces all of that, and there's ways of articulating that in lots of different means and measures.
Question number 6, Colette Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how its budget aims to benefit people in East Kilbride.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robison.
The Scottish budget delivers across the whole of Scotland against this government's priorities to eradicate child poverty, grow the economy, tackle the climate emergency and ensure high quality and sustainable public services for people in East Kilbride. This will include over £820 million of funding for South Lanarkshire Council.
Colette Stevenson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. From national insurance hikes to cutting winter fuel payments for pensioners, the UK Labour Government's reckless decisions are having a huge impact on people and businesses in East Kilbride and across the country. Locally, I have heard from community groups who cannot get access to a community space to carry out their valuable work due to local Labour cuts in South Lanarkshire. Meanwhile, the Council is spending around £49 million on PFI repayments this year, a toxic legacy from the last Labour government, and our communities are paying the price. Could the Cabinet Secretary outline the additional money being given to South Lanarkshire Council this year and how the Scottish Government supports grassroots and community organisations to continue their valuable work?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Colette Stevenson is of course quite right to highlight these issues. In addition to the £823.9 million of direct funding to South Lanarkshire Council, I can tell Colette Stevenson that there is also £23 million to support the town centre redevelopment through the Glasgow City Region deal, and of course the £144 million for the East Kilbride Rail Enhancement Project, which will be completed by December 2025, and that includes the newly opened fully accessible Hairmyres station. And we're also providing £24 million towards the Community Growth Areas projects, which has included support for works at Jackton Primary School and Our Lady of Lourdes Primary School Extension and Hairmyres Park and Ride.
Question number 7, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Education Secretary has had with NHS boards and local authorities regarding the levying of fees for hospital teaching costs for children who routinely attend independent schools.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
Hospital education services are normally run by the local authority and relevant NHS boards for the area in which the hospital is based, using teachers employed by their home local authority. These services also invite referrals for pupils from independent schools, as well as pupils from local authority-run schools in other areas where a pupil is required to stay in the hospital for a prolonged period of time. Decisions around fees to be charged for hospital education services are therefore a matter for local authorities and NHS boards to consider, with independent schools as appropriate.
Craig Hoy.
Sick children who attend independent schools but who are being treated in hospital are being denied access to education unless they pay £115 an hour for teaching, which would be free if they went to a state school. Lawrence, the son of 2 of my constituents, was diagnosed with leukaemia in March and will not return to the Compass School until the autumn. His parents already pay tax towards the state education they don't use. They pay VAT on school fees and require to rent a flat to be near the hospital where their son is being treated. Lawrence has already had the distress of watching other children in his ward receiving education provided by Edinburgh City Council, which he cannot access. A discrimination which cannot be compliant with the Scottish Government's policy of getting it right for every child, nor the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So will the Minister urgently now look at the Scottish Government's guidance to councils on this issue and, if necessary, provide additional resources to them to ensure universal access to education for all sick children, regardless of whether or not where they are normally educated?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for raising what I think is a really important issue. To give him some assurance, my officials have engaged directly with Edinburgh City Council on the substantive of his remarks today, and whilst I'm not going to comment on the specific issues, I am going to reflect in my engagement with officials in relation to our guidance. At the current time, though, I should be clear that our national guidance does not make any specific reference to independent schools in relation to charging, and it would certainly be my expectation that where a pupil attends an independent school, there should be a discussion with that school in relation to these matters, but I'm happy to take away the point the member raises today and to engage further on the substantives in relation to our national guidance and also in relation to the role of Edinburgh City Council, of course, as a local authority.
That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Climate Change Committee's new report sets out what this government needs to do to reach its 2045 net zero target. They would have to reduce oil and gas production by 91%, which would devastate the industry and our economy. They would have to ask homeowners to meet stringent and expensive new energy standards. They would have to get more than half the population to drive electric cars or vans by 2035. For cars, the current figure is just 2.2%, and for vans, it's less than 1%. This report lays bare the crippling cost to hard-working families and businesses. Does John Swinney think the committee's proposals are realistic?
First Minister.
President, so the Government will carefully consider the advice of the Committee on Climate Change before setting out our proposed carbon budgets in secondary legislation in due course. There are obviously a lot of policy proposals within the Committee's recommendations. The Government will consider those. But what I think is absolutely inescapable is that we have got to take action to tackle climate change in our society. That is why the Government is absolutely committed to achieving net zero by 2045, because the implications and the consequences of not doing so are very dramatic and very damaging for Scotland and our economy.
Russell Finlay.
So let's take a look at some of the specific suggestions in this report. To meet the SNP's net zero target, the number of cattle and sheep in Scotland would need to fall by 2 million, a cull of 2 million animals in the next decade. That's around 25%. This would drive farmers out of business, destroy the rural economy and put our food security at risk. The report says that Scots would need to eat 1/3 less meat. This is utter madness. It's an act of national self-harm. Will John Swinney today rule out going ahead with this specific plan?
First Minister.
As I've said, Presiding Officer, the Government will, in an orderly fashion, consider the advice of the Committee on Climate Change and set out our own proposals for taking the action that is absolutely necessary. What I would say to Parliament is that there has been parliamentary consensus around the importance of achieving net zero by 2045. That has been supported across the political spectrum, and the Government will consider specific proposals, bring those forward, and Parliament will have the opportunity to decide on whether those proposals should be approved or not.
Well, there's absolutely no reassurance for farmers in that answer. So let's look at another one of the measures in the report. Fewer than 1% of Scotland's homes have a heat pump, and to meet the SNP's 2045 target, it would need to reach almost 70%. The number of annual installations would need to increase 5-fold in just 5 years' time. That's before we work out how people would afford them, with heat pumps typically costing between £8,000 and £15,000. That proposal is simply not realistic, and if it was imposed, it would hammer hard-working Scots. Will John Swinney please rule it out now?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Finlay talked about reassurance for farmers. As a representative of a constituency that includes many farming members of the community, I take the commitment to support the future of Scottish agriculture very seriously, and it's always been reflected. In my policy priorities. I can tell Parliament what was not reassuring to farmers was the Brexit that Mr Finlay supported, that has damaged the economic opportunities.
Let's hear one another.
It's the
Mr.
Brexit.
Mr. Ross, you have persistently refused to abide by our standing orders, and I would ask you to leave this chamber, and you are excluded for the rest of the day. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the issue of...
Sorry, excuse me, First Minister. Mr. Ross, I have asked you to leave the chamber. Please do so. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the reassurance for farmers was absent in the Brexit that the Conservatives imposed upon us, and it has caused incalculable...
First Minister, Mr Lumsden, please refrain from shouting from your seat. First Minister.
And it's caused incalculable damage on the farming industry in Scotland, and this Government is working to repair that damage. The second point I would make is that the targets of reaching net zero by 2045 are not the SNP's, they are Parliament's. Yes. Democratically agreed by Parliament because we all recognised the importance of climate action. Now, what we see just now, and it's very obvious what we're seeing in front of us, is the Conservatives deserting the action that's necessary on climate for cheap political opportunity. This Government will act. This Government will do what it always does, act in the best interests of the people of Scotland and secure the future of our country.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I can only share my colleagues' frustration at this weekly exercise in deflection and evasion. The SNP have missed their eco targets for years. their expert advisers now confirm that the only way to reach net zero by 2045 is by imposing radical and financially devastating policies. If John Swinney sticks to his target, he has to be honest with the people of Scotland about the price he expects them to pay. People will be forced to ditch petrol cars, rip out their boilers and change their diets. Farmers would need to get rid of cattle. Scotland's oil and gas industry would cease to exist. All of this to be paid through higher taxes and higher household bills. None of this makes sense to people in the real world. It's just not realistic or affordable. And does John Swinney agree? Or will he continue making promises he knows the SNP cannot keep?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, between 1990 and 2022, Scotland's emissions halved, while the economy grew by 66.6%. Now, I cite that information to say to Parliament that it is possible for us to grow our economy and reduce our emissions by sensible investment. What does that sensible investment involve? It involves supporting the transition to renewable energy, and I mean the transition to renewable energy, where we manage carefully the way in which we generate our energy by attracting investment, which
hear the First Minister.
Which we are successfully doing to secure the energy future of our country. That is the commitment of the Scottish Government, to make sure that we deliver a just transition, that we grow the economy and that we always take the action to protect the interests of the people of Scotland. We will do that in the SNP Government, while the Conservatives play politics with the opportunists.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Another week and another set of damning statistics demonstrating the SNP's mismanagement of our NHS. Now 860,925 people on an NHS waiting list. That is 1 in 6 Scots. 105,953 of them have been waiting over a year, and over 13,000 Scots have been waiting for over 2 years, the highest ever recorded. And there is a human cost. Just one example is Tracy Meehan, who has waited over 100 weeks to be treated for an ovarian cyst. Living in pain, constant anxiety, desperate to work but can't, and unable to do as much with her children as she wants. Why are hundreds of thousands of Scottish patients like Tracy paying the price for SNP failure?
First Minister.
President, as I have explained in Parliament on many occasions before, I recognise the significant impact of long waits on individual patients, and I apologise to everybody who's affected by those long waits. It's why the tackling of long waits is so central to the Government's plans to deliver the improvements in the National Health Service that are required. I'm aware of the case of Tracy Meehan. I saw the media reports upon that. My officials have already contacted NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to raise the case of Ms Meehan. We are advised that there is dialogue underway with Ms Meehan about the procedure, and I hope that leads to progress. But there are obviously many other people like Ms Meehan who are waiting for treatment, and I apologise for those circumstances. For those reasons, the Government has invested with the largest investment in the National Health Service that has ever been made. And based on the most recent initiative we took to tackle volume of transactions in the health service and procedures, we expected there to be 64,000 additional appointments and procedures by March of this year, but in fact we achieved 105,500. So I hope that gives Mr Sarwar and members of the public reassurance that the Government is focusing on expanding capacity to tackle the issue that he raises.
Ms Sarwar.
President Officer, week after week, John Swinney comes to this chamber and apologises, and things continue to get worse. People don't want to hear sorry, they want treatment, and that is on this SNP Government. Time after time, the SNP has promised to get to grips with the crisis in our NHS. They promised recovery after the pandemic, but the situation has just got worse. The Government is now on to its 5th NHS recovery plan, its 4th Health Minister, its 3rd First Minister since that promise, and the crisis only deepens. Thousands of people are waiting over 2 years for procedures in specialisms including ENT, neurosurgery, orthopaedics, that's hip and knee replacements, and gynaecology, including ovarian surgery, like Tracy? When will John Swinney finally just come clean and admit that he and his government have utterly failed and that he has no plan to fix Scotland's NHS?
First Minister.
What I'd say to Mr Sarwar is that I welcome the acknowledgement in his question of the significant impact of the COVID pandemic, because all of us must realise that the pandemic had a serious and detrimental effect on the ability of the National Health Service over a period essentially of about 2 years to be able to tackle the health issues that members of the public face. That's why we have a plan in place to focus on expanding capacity, and what I set out earlier on this year involves enhancing the capacity of national treatment centres, about expanding regional delivery of healthcare services to increase levels of activity, and to put in place additional capacity in hospitals like Garnavel, Inverclyde, Stracathro, Perth Royal Infirmary and Queen Margaret Hospital to deliver more procedures in exactly the specialisms that Mr Sarwar has put to me. So I acknowledge the scale of the challenge, and we're putting in place the practical expansion of capacity to make sure we can treat more patients, and that's exactly what the government is focused on doing.
Anna Sarwar.
Just like this SNP government, the plan is not working and Scotland needs a new direction. And there is a human cost of SNP failure. Take the case of Eileen Kelly, an 80-year-old grandmother from the south side of Glasgow. Eileen is living with severe osteoarthritis in both hips, so severe in fact that her entire right hip has disintegrated. When she most needed help, she was told that she was facing a wait of 2.5 years on the NHS. And due to the severe pain she is in, she's had to pay over £10,000 to be treated privately. Eileen told me, "I live 2 flights up and I've been left immobile and in agony. I've worked and paid taxes all my life, but when I needed the NHS, the SNP let me down. I feel betrayed and abandoned." This is the reality of the NHS after 2 decades of SNP rule. 1 in 6 Scots on an NHS waiting list, waits soaring and thousands being forced to go private. So why has John Swinney and SNP incompetence left our NHS on life support?
First Minister.
In his previous question, Mr Sarwar referenced the significance of the COVID pandemic. And all of us must realistically look at the fact that the COVID pandemic interrupted the ability to deliver healthcare services for members of the public for a 2-year period, and it takes a period of recovery time from that. It needs focus, it needs direction to ensure it is successful, and the measures I've set out about the expansion of capacity are designed to do that. Now, I'm sorry that Mrs Kelly has had the experience that she has had. Obviously, there are individuals who are getting treatment earlier than she has received or been promised in this circumstance, because there is an ability to put forward legitimate clinical cases for urgent intervention where that is able to be undertaken. And if Mr Sarwar wants to furnish me with the details of the case, I will examine exactly what's happened in this circumstance. But we are working to make sure we've got the staff and the resources in place to address this issue. What will not help us is the approach that has now been taken on immigration, because anyone looking at the details of what's been set out by the UK Government in turning off the ability of us being able to attract international workers will realise that that's a very damaging blow to our health service. Because our health service, and I saw data from Scottish Care, for example, about social care, is heavily dependent.
Let's hear one another.
Is heavily dependent on international workers. And if the UK Government decides to turn off the ability of the Scottish Health Service to attract international workers, it will make our challenge to address the waiting times issue ever more difficult as a consequence of the actions of the UK Government. So I appeal to Mr Sarwar to join me in what I said to the Prime Minister on Friday. The immigration proposals will be damaging to our National Health Service, and we don't want anything to do with them.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Outside Parliament today, people gathered to express their anger at the Scottish Government's intention to approve a resort development by Flamingo Land on the shores of Loch Lomond. It's been opposed by the National Trust for Scotland, by the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, by over 155,000 people, and it was rejected unanimously by the National Park. It's the most unpopular development in the history of the Scottish planning system. Now, I know the First Minister is about to tell us that he can't comment on a specific appeal, but his Minister has already made a political decision. It took Ivan McKee just 2 working days to announce his refusal to act in the public interest and recall the appeal. So he and the First Minister have to be accountable for that now. There is still a chance we can save Loch Lomond. This decision isn't set in stone. So will the First Minister listen to all those who have been objecting for years and put the natural environment ahead of corporate profit and recall this decision?
First Minister.
As Mr Harvey has indicated, as the appeal remains live, members have to understand that it would not be appropriate for me to comment in detail on the proposal. I am aware that the reporter has issued a notice of intention to allow the appeal and to grant planning permission in principle, subject to 49 planning conditions and the reaching of a legal agreement, including the Lomond Promise, with a commitment to community benefits and fair work. The reporter is required to make his decision on the planning merits of the case and to take full account of all submissions made by the parties involved in this case, including representations from members of the local community.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm afraid I really don't think the First Minister is even attempting to acknowledge the scale of anger about this issue. Anger that's been demonstrated by people outside Parliament today, that's been demonstrated by 44,000 people who've already written to the Minister, and anger that is a result of this unnecessary, unwanted and destructive development. But of course, it's not the first time that this First Minister has defended that kind of development. In 2007, when John Swinney had been in government for less than a year, he overturned a local planning decision to approve another controversial, environmentally destructive project from a greedy, bullying developer. That, of course, was to give Donald Trump his golf course. And even Trump's project director from those days has made it clear that the government was hoodwinked. This isn't standing up for Scotland. Did the First Minister learn nothing from his mistake? And why is he still willing to back greedy developers who can't look at a landscape without seeing an opportunity to bulldoze it for profit?
First Minister.
I'm absolutely committed to the protection of the natural environment of Scotland, and in all the decisions that I would take and in the steps I would take, I value and cherish the natural environment of Scotland. The reporter has got to come to a decision based on the planning merits of the case, and in this particular circumstance, on a whole range of different conditions, the reporter has established a notice of intention to allow the appeal, subject to 49 planning conditions that I'm sure address the issues that Mr Harvey is raising with me. So these issues have to be the subject of further discussion, and that's the proper exercise of the planning process, which I am obliged by law to ensure is the case.
Question number 4, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's latest engagement with the UK Government regarding their plans for winter fuel payment and any implications this has for the Scottish Government's work to deliver a universal pension age winter heating payment in Scotland.
First Minister.
Since the Prime Minister made his announcement, the Scottish Government has not been furnished with detail, and the lack of information is only adding further to uncertainty. The Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government has written to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury this week, urging the UK Government to share its plans with us as quickly as possible so that we can understand any implications for our own programmes and, crucially, also for our budget.
Claire Adamson.
Thank the First Minister for his answer. Under pressure, the Prime Minister has effectively admitted that Labour's winter fuel payment cut was wrong. But the lack of information from the UK Government on how, when or if they will means test the winter fuel payment is causing anxiety for pensioners. First Ministers, are our pensioners to be kept in the dark as well as in the cold?
First Minister.
President Officer, Claire Adamson is right to highlight the lack of information that has come since the Prime Minister made his statement a week ago yesterday. So we await further detail and implications for Scotland. What I would say to Claire Adamson is that pensioners in Scotland should be absolutely assured that where the Labour Government decided as one of their first acts to remove winter fuel payments from pensioners, the Scottish National Party government has stepped in and we have introduced a universal payment that will provide support to over 812,000 pensioner households in Scotland, support that is not available anywhere else in the United Kingdom. So the people of Scotland, and crucially the pensioners of Scotland, can see that where the Labour government takes away the winter fuel payment, the SNP government will restore it.
Question number 5, Stephen Kerr.
To ask the First Minister, in light of it being almost 5 years since the Scottish Government committed to spending £60 million to renew every play park in Scotland, and of reports that less than half of the funding has been spent, what action the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that children do not miss out on renewed facilities?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has provided £35 million to local authority partners, which has already seen 1,100 play parks renewed since September 2021. In 2025-26, we are providing a further £25 million to help accelerate local authorities' plans and make more parks welcoming, free and accessible spaces for all children to enjoy. This means our £60 million commitment will be met by my government, and based on a scoping exercise undertaken by COSLA in 2022, we estimate this will allow a total renewal of nearly 2,000 play parks, including all parks assessed by local authorities as being in need of immediate renewal.
Stephen Kerr.
First Minister, that sounds like another Swinney broken promise to me, because he promised a free tablet, laptop, internet connection to every child in Scotland, a free bike for every child, to close the attainment gap, to recruit an additional 3,500 teachers, free school breakfasts and lunch to every primary school pupil in Scotland all year round. He's failed on every promise, and now he will fail on delivering the promise of refurbishing every play park in Scotland by the end of this Parliament. Why should the people of this country believe anything the First Minister says when everywhere we look we see this SNP government offering up big empty election gimmicks, then failing to deliver?
I would remind all members that we use full names or titles in the chamber. First Minister.
I think Stephen Kerr needs to go to a play park to get rid of some of his excess energy.
Let's hear one another.
He seems just a little bit too excited for words today. Let me inject some basic arithmetic into Parliament today. 25 add 35 equals 60, which equals the fulfilment of the government's promise. And one of the basic foundations of being a Member of Parliament is when you don't get the answer that you expect, you've got to pivot to deal with it. And Mr Kerr can't handle that.
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I've got a bizarre and inexplicable tolerance of Mr Kerr, who makes even a sunny day is like that black cloud appears, even only temporarily. Can I, in terms of the playgrounds...
Ms Graham, please have a seat. Sorry, Mr Lumsden, were you trying to attract attention? I'm just asking why you were shouting from your seat. Please desist. Christine Graham.
Can I say, Presiding Officer, that on playgrounds, can I commend the fact, apart from the fact that Mr Kerr seems to need an abacus rather than a playground, that in the borders £800,000 has already been allocated, £1 million in Midlothian. And on a serious note, after COVID, when children were isolated for so long socially and having fresh air and having fun, it's an excellent project that liberates them to the safe space of a playground, not too safe, but safe enough.
First Minister.
I think Christine Graham makes an incredibly powerful point, because in the aftermath of COVID, when we all know there were negative implications on children and young people in our society, making sure there are good facilities for children and young people to enjoy is part of the work that we have to do. I had the pleasure with the Deputy First Minister of seeing some of that improvement work that's been undertaken in Kirkintilloch some weeks ago, and it's happening in other parts of the country, and I'm not surprised it's been welcomed by my wise colleague Christine Graham.
Martin Whitfield.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government's promise was to renew every play park. Will it be every play park?
Well, I answered the point in my earlier answer where
Sorry, First Minister. Mr Kerr, you have had an opportunity to put questions to the First Minister, and I would now ask you to desist from shouting from your seat. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government undertook an exercise with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, working with our local authority partners to determine the way in which this approach could best be taken to complement local work. That's the Government working in partnership with local authorities. That's what Parliament always asked us to do, and once again, the Government's delivered.
Question number 6, Monica Lennon.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to maintain its policy aim of keeping pace with the EU on environmental protection.
First Minister.
President Officer, the Scottish Government is committed to remaining aligned with the EU where it is possible and meaningful for Scotland to do so. This commitment is reflected in our annual reports to the Scottish Parliament on the use of the alignment power under the Continuity Act. Many of our environmental regulations were derived from EU law, and this is an important area for consideration of alignment. We are currently assessing the revised EU Environmental Crime Directive, including its provision for higher penalties for serious environmental harm, equivalent to ecocide.
Monica Lennon.
I thank the First Minister for his response. The Ecocide Scotland Bill would make it a criminal offence to cause widespread, long-term or irreversible environmental damage, with up to 20 years in prison for individuals and unlimited fines for organisations. Ecocide law was pioneered by the trailblazing Scottish lawyer, the late Pauline Higgins. The EU and many countries worldwide are acting to deter and punish these devastating crimes. This is Scotland's time to act. So does the First Minister agree with the bill's aims, and does he welcome this vital opportunity for Scotland to become the first UK nation to criminalise ecocide?
First Minister.
President Officer, first of all, let me compliment Monica Lennon on the diligent work that she has undertaken to engage with many stakeholders and many parties, and also with the Government, on the formulation of the bill that she has now introduced to Parliament. I recognise the importance that she attaches to this piece of legislation, and the Government understands the significance of the points that are raised. We will, of course, consider the bill that Monica Lennon has brought forward and would welcome further dialogue with her on this question. We are committed to the protection of our natural environment, which is represented by the introduction in February of the Natural Environment Bill. But of course we will give very serious consideration to the points raised by Monica Lennon, because the conduct and the implications and the impact of the issues that she is raising are detrimental to our natural environment, and we have to protect that.
Question number 7, Willie Rennie.
To ask the First Minister for what reason there has reportedly been no financial agreement between the Scottish Funding Council and the University of Dundee in light of the Alternative Financial Recovery Plan being launched 4 weeks ago.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the University of Dundee is an autonomous institution responsible for its own decision-making powers and must consider whether further financial support is required. As of this morning, we have not yet received any request from the Scottish Funding Council. However, as I have reiterated throughout this issue, the Scottish Government and the Funding Council will give careful consideration to any request for additional support within the legislative framework. I am encouraged by the University's commitment to minimise job losses, but it is vital that the University consults on its revised plan with its community, including with trade unions and the Strategic Advisory Task Force chaired by Sir Alan Langlands.
Willie Rennie.
This has been agonising for university staff. A cloud has been hanging over them since November, and that's 7 months ago. And they simply cannot understand that why we still have no financial agreement 4 weeks on from the publication of the new financial recovery plan. One staff member had tears in her eyes as she told me about the toll that it's taking on her and her family. So how much longer does the First Minister think that she will have to wait?
First Minister.
First of all, President Officer, let me sympathise and empathise with the point that Mr Rennie raises with me on behalf of his constituent. At my constituency surgery on Monday, I had a member of staff come to see me in my constituency capacity, essentially conveying the very same message. So I understand entirely where Mr Rennie is coming from, and I want to make sure the government acts properly and effectively to address the legitimate concerns that he puts to me. He will, of course, acknowledge, because he is entirely familiar with the legislative arrangements that we have, that the University of Dundee operates as an autonomous institution. It has to take the initiative to come to the Funding Council and the Government. What I assure Mr Rennie about is that this issue has got the most active engagement of the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister and the Education Secretary and the Higher Education Minister within Government, and we are ready to consider any requests that are made to us properly by the University of Dundee and the Funding Council.
Michael Mara. And this is what they had to say to me. The weight of not knowing, of being left in limbo, is taking a huge toll on mental health and morale. It's not just us, it's our families too. The endless delays and broken promises from management and government are leaving us all in despair. When will they do something? The government's own target is 300 job losses, and the costings, I am told, have now been submitted and are with officials. Can the First Minister commit to Parliament today that the voluntary severance scheme will be in place and open by the end of next week?
First Minister. Well, Mr Mara knows I can't give that commitment, because that would be me dictating to an independent institution how it should go about its own governance, and I would break the law if I did that. It's as simple as that. Now, I'm trying to give Mr Mara a substantive answer, if he would allow me to do that. I understand the anxieties of members of staff, because they come to my constituency surgeries. I hear it very directly, and I totally accept the worry and the anxiety that is caused. But I have to operate within the existing legal framework, and I give Mr Mara, as I give to Parliament, as I give to members of staff at the University of Dundee, the absolute commitment the government is engaging actively and promptly on all of these questions. And lastly, let me say this. I have said to Parliament on a previous occasion my absolute commitment to securing the future of the University of Dundee. I unreservedly reiterate that in front of Parliament today, and the government will follow that approach in all that we do.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to welcome the news that Green aircraft engine developer Zero Avia will establish a major manufacturing base in Scotland, creating 350 jobs. Can I ask the First Minister, what assessment has the Scottish Government made of the economic impact of this investment, and can he say more about the steps the Scottish Government is taking to attract inward investment like this throughout Scotland?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Adam raises a particular case which is directly relevant to the answers I gave to Russell Finlay earlier on, because Mr Adam raises the case of Zero Avia, which has decided to locate its manufacturing facility of hydrogen fuel cell technology for air travel at the Advanced Manufacturing District in Shinnon. As a consequence of that, there will be up to 350 jobs created, so that's in the low-carbon technologies, 350 high-skilled, high-value jobs being created, made possible by the investment, yes, of Zero Avia, but also the investment of the United Kingdom Government's National Wealth Fund and the Scottish Government's the Scottish National Investment Bank that acts on our behalf, and by investment from Scottish enterprise. So this is a classic example of how, by working with the private sector, the government can attract investment. This is the work the Deputy First Minister is leading within government to make sure that we attract investment into Scotland and that we create economic opportunity out of the journey to net zero, which is the point I was making to Mr Finlay in my earlier answer. I am delighted that there will be a positive economic impact in Mr Adams' constituency in Paisley and also in the constituency of my colleague Natalie Donanis.
Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Having milked the public purse for years while the going was good, Stagecoach have now decided to throw Dumfries and Galloway under the bus, with reports they're planning to exit the region altogether, abandoning over 100 members of staff, closing 2 depots in Dumfries and Stranraer, and even handing back school transport contracts. This presents a huge challenge across a large rural local authority, and constituents are seeking urgent reassurance that they will still be able to get to work, school and hospital appointments. Will the First Minister commit the Government and its agencies to working with Dumfries and Galloway Council to help ensure bus services do not collapse and explore alternative options that will help retain current drivers and staff?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, as I understand this issue, this is part of a live procurement exercise that's been led by Dumfries and Galloway Council, and that is going through a process, and the Scottish Government has no involvement in that decision-making process. I am assured that local authority officers are working through options as part of the procurement process, but I understand the point that Mr Mundell puts to me of the importance of sustaining community travel services in Dumfries and Galloway. They will be challenging enough for members of the public without any diminution of those services. So I will ask my officials to look at the situation to see if there is any scope for the Government to assist in reaching agreement. But what I'm being advised so far is that this is a live procurement exercise involving the Council. But I'll take Mr Mundell's point away and consider how the Government can assist in any way.
Colin Smith.
First Minister, do you accept that, given the scale of the services provided by Stagecoach in the region, where they have a near monopoly on school transport and those lifeline subsidised services, that we do need to look at alternatives urgently, because we cannot face a situation where school kids in August may not be able to get to school through bus transport because of the actions as part of this negotiation at the moment, and lifeline services are taken away? It is an example of the fact that the bus network system is broken in this country, and big companies have a monopoly, and when they walk away, it's communities that miss out most.
First Minister.
I do accept the final point that Mr Smith makes, and hence the importance of, in this exercise, Dumfries and Galloway Council acting in a fashion that enables the continuity of services to be provided. I think there are obviously legislative options, but there are opportunities available in legislation for bus services to be organised in a different way. That's been provided for by the legislation that this Government has enacted. But I accept that in the timescale that Mr Smith and Mr Mundell have put to me, it is very urgent for there to be a resolution on this question. So I'll give Mr Smith the assurance I gave Mr Mundell that the Transport Secretary will look at this case and see if there's anything the Government can do to try to help to resolve matters, to ensure continuity of services, which is a legitimate expectation from Mr Smith.
Colin Beattie.
Can I ask the First Minister how the Memorandum of Understanding between the Scottish Government and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, committing our government and that of Ukraine to strengthening trade and investment links, will allow Scotland to do its part in supporting Ukraine to rebuild their country in the face of Russia's illegal war? And can I ask the First Minister to make a commitment to Parliament and to the country that his government will keep under active review the ways in which Scotland can support the future of Ukraine and, by extension, the peace and stability of Europe?
First Minister.
President Officer, I had the enormous pleasure on Tuesday evening, along with Richard Lochhead, the Business Minister, to meet with the delegation who have come, delegation of mayors from around Ukraine who have come to Scotland to sign the trade agreement and also to encourage collaboration. The agreement was signed by the Cabinet Secretary for External Affairs, Angus Robertson, on Wednesday on the Government's behalf. And this dialogue has been encouraged and enabled by the work of the cross-party group in Parliament on Ukraine, of which Mr Beattie is the convener, I understand, and I'm really grateful to the cross-party group for that support. This is one example about how we can establish further cooperation and collaboration with Ukraine as the country tries to recover from the illegal invasion of Ukraine. But it also is an opportunity for me to indicate our resolute support for the people of Ukraine. I was in London on Friday and I met the Prime Minister, and I have to say, of all the things the Prime Minister said to me on Friday, I cannot compliment enough his resolution in support of Ukraine in all that he said to me and to leaders of other devolved governments on Friday. And I applaud the Prime Minister for that resolute support. He speaks on behalf of the Scottish Parliament about the importance of us standing up to Russian aggression, protecting Ukraine and securing its future. And we will stand steadfast with the people of Ukraine in that regard.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Due to historic SNP cuts, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service has brought forward plans to scrap 24/7 fire cover at Hoyk Fire Station. This will leave towns and nearby communities at risk. I met with firefighters this month who told me how these cuts will pose a direct threat to them and residents across the borders. Will the First Minister join my campaign to save Hoyk Fire Station? And given the very real danger this will pose to my constituents, I feel it's imperative he gets back behind this campaign.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service is undertaking a consultation on different aspects of service redesign. They will conduct that in an engaged fashion. There are 23 service delivery review options that are being considered as part of a full public consultation that will commence at the end of June 2025. So obviously the points that Rachel Hamilton has made can be part of that consultation. In relation to, and it's important that, and that will be approached by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service on the basis of what is a sustainable approach to fire and rescue cover around the country. And that, of course, varies around the country based on the number of incidents and the level of risk that is carried in particular localities. But it will be carried out on a professional basis by SFRS. In relation to the financial questions, the Government has increased the budget for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service by £18.1 million for this financial year, and indeed the budget has increased by £97 million since 2017-18. So the Government's been investing, but from time to time the Fire and Rescue Service needs to explore what is the right deployment of its resources, and it will do that in a professional way whilst protecting public safety.
Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following the UK Government's delayed publication of its child poverty strategy, Save the Children has warned this will mean 20,000 more children will be dragged into poverty. Does the First Minister share my concern that Westminster's inaction is yet again getting in the way of Scottish Government's work to eradicate child poverty in South Scotland and across the rest of Scotland?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I think it's important that action is taken across all governments to eradicate child poverty. That's the focus of my government. We're taking steps to, we have the child payment in place, which is increasing this year. We have taken the decision to abolish the two-child limit, which is an important step in lifting children out of poverty. My plea to the Prime Minister on Friday was that the UK Government acts in a way that assists us in our endeavour to eradicate child poverty. I am concerned that the steps that are being taken on welfare reform will throw more children into poverty, and I hope that a different course of action is taken by the United Kingdom Government, because we are committed to eradicating child poverty, and it would be helpful after all these years of austerity and the damage done by the Conservatives if a Labour Government could help us in our work to eradicate child poverty.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, it has been reported that Police Scotland receive approximately 20,000 calls per month relating to mental health issues. The impact of the demand on the ability for the service is significant, with a lack of suitably trained psychologists, a lack of continued fast-tracking for individuals who have ability to be looked after, which should not include police custody suites. What action is the Scottish Government taking to urgently support police officers during this mental health crisis?
First Minister.
Well, President Officer, we are taking a number of steps to expand mental health capacity. For example, we've exceeded our commitment to fund over 800 additional mental health workers in various locations, including accident emergency departments, GP practices and in other public sector facilities. We are also supporting the expansion of community-based support, with over £145 million invested since 2020 in community ventures to support young people. In addition to that, nearly 83,000 children, young people and their family members have accessed community-based mental health support between July 2023 and March 2024. And I think this indicates that we are building capacity to make sure that the mental health needs of the population are effectively addressed in community settings around the country.
That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Michelle Thompson, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the public gallery and chamber to do so.
Okay, the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 17419 in the name of Michelle Thompson on 30 years on from the Bosnian genocide in Srebrenica. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons, and I invite Michelle Thompson to open the debate around about 7 minutes. Ms Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm honoured to speak to my motion 30 years on from the Bosnian genocide in Srebrenica. In the troubled world of today, it is important to reflect, and I'm indebted to the work of the charity Beyond Srebrenica and its programme Lessons from Srebrenica. I give thanks to the work of David Hamilton, Sabina Cabbage-McKenzie and all others involved in the charity for the chance to participate in their delegate programme, and to the Scottish Government for its sponsorship. Rereading a published document from the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, it's telling how they, in quite a matter-of-fact way, described the significance of the events in Srebrenica in July 1995. I quote them. The massacre that occurred in Srebrenica in July 1995 was the single worst atrocity committed in the former Yugoslavia during the wars of the 1990s and the worst massacre that occurred in Europe since the months after World War II. Some of the evidence presented in subsequent court cases was harrowing. In June 2005, during cross-examination of a witness in the case against Slobodan Milosevic, the court viewed rare video footage showing a Serbian paramilitary unit, calling itself the Scorpions, execute a small group of Bosnian Muslim men and teenage boys captured after the fall of Srebrenica in 1995. The images of Serbian soldiers tormenting and then shooting the Bosnian Muslim prisoners whose hands were tied behind their backs and who offered no resistance before being shot was to prove a telling piece of evidence. The trial examined evidence of mass executions at a total of 9 sites from the 13th to the 17th of July 1995. Dozens of burial sites were created for the mass disposal of bodies, and the evidence showed it to be a lie that those killed were combatants. This was also not a result of some spontaneous revenge killings. Far from it. This was a premeditated and planned mass killing operation of men and boys. This was a genocide. Soldiers were mobilised to guard the prisoners, move them to execution sites and to shoot them. Thousands of rounds of ammunition to shoot the prisoners were supplied. A great many vehicles were commandeered to move the prisoners, and bulldozers and excavators were commissioned to dig their graves. The killings were done in a grotesque fashion, and as one of the rare survivors recounted to the court, when they opened fire, I threw myself on the ground and one man fell on my head. I think that he was killed on the spot, and I could feel the hot blood pouring over me. I could hear one man crying for help. He was begging them to kill him, and they simply said, "Let him suffer, we'll kill him later." This was a case of both genocide and androcide, the systematic killing of males because of their sex as part of a deliberate campaign to eliminate a specific religious and ethnic group, and horrific exercise in ethnic cleansing. Besides the thousands of men and boys killed, tens of thousands of women and children were uprooted and removed from the area. And as my motion states, 54 individuals have been prosecuted to date for their role in the massacre, but considers that many more were involved in creating the culture and the environment which led to the genocide in Srebrenica through their use of hate speech, oppression, discrimination and propaganda against the Bosnian Muslim population. I should have added only before the number 54. The international community failed in 1995. Too many, including the blue helmets of the UN, looked the other way. But, Presiding Officer, if I could offer a personal perspective after being invited to visit Srebrenica by the charity last year, it was one of the best organised trips I've ever been on and really gave a proper sense of what happened and the extent to which events still rest heavily on those who remain, and rightly so. Women are always casualties in war too, and this was no different. Whilst visiting the cemetery where over 6,000 bodies have now been officially buried, we also spoke with Merja Dogas, who lost her husband and 3 sons in the conflict. Quoted in an article by Eddie Barnes, a fellow delegate, she said, "I would never have returned to Srebrenica if one of my children was alive. But since they are all dead, then this is the only place I can be near to them." We visited the charity, the Association of Women Victims of War, who gives voice to many women who were raped during the conflict. They not only collect their stories but attempt to bring about prosecutions of the perpetrators, men who move openly still in Serbian society today. We drove past a warehouse in Kravica, it being one of the places where over 1,370 men were shot. The bullet holes have been plastered over, but a wall has been built around it. This stops the mothers and wives laying flowers in homage to their loved ones. Bosnian politics have long been notoriously complex, and it remains so to this day. Despite promises made, accession to the EU feels no closer for many of the successor states of Yugoslavia, and the lack of progress continues to be an irritation and a sense of being let down across the entire region. The shift away from a European focus with the new American foreign policy can only embolden other actors in the region, and I fear that we feel further away than we ever have been to acknowledge what happened, take the steps required to allow for healing and to move forward. So the work of the International Commission on Missing Persons continues. It is still finding the remains of the men who were killed, sometimes, again, still from multiple locations as the bodies were buried, lifted and buried again, sometimes multiple times. Presiding Officer, I give the final words to Merja, again speaking to Eddie Barnes. She said, "Why do we do this? We are fighting for justice and truth to be heard. Our fight is for the truth and justice for our beloved ones who were killed. Her fight for truth and justice is a fight for us all."
Thank you, Ms Thompson. We move to the open debate. I call for Stephen Kerr to be followed by Karen Adam. Around 4 minutes. Mr Kerr.
Well, can I begin by thanking Michelle Thompson for her motion and bringing this debate to the Chamber, but can I also congratulate her, if that's the right word, on a speech that brought home again to all of us the horrors, the harrowing detail and the memories of what occurred 30 years ago in Srebrenica, because that is indeed an act of horror. 8,372 Bosniak men and boys murdered in cold blood. But amid this massacre, this genocide, another crime was committed. Less visible, yet no less devastating. The mass systematic rape of Bosniak women and girls. Sexual violence was not incidental to this conflict. It was used deliberately as a tool of ethnic cleansing, humiliation and destruction. Tens of thousands of women were subjected to unspeakable abuse, and many will carry that trauma today, largely in silence. That is why the Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict Initiative, PSVI, matters. This UK-led initiative exists because of the failure to prevent atrocities like those committed in Bosnia and the lack of prosecutions that follow when they do. It seeks to end the culture of impunity around conflict-related sexual violence and place survivors at the heart of justice and peacekeeping. Srebrenica is a stark reminder of what happens when hate is left unchecked and when the international resolve falters. 30 years on, fewer than 1% of sexual violence cases in Bosnia have led to convictions. That failure of justice is not just a historic shame, it is a continuing injustice. So we commend the work of the mothers of Srebrenica and beyond Srebrenica for keeping the truth alive. But we must do more. If we are to truly honour the victims, we must confront the ongoing use of sexual violence in conflicts today, from Africa to the Middle East, and ensure that PSVI has the political backing and the resources to make a difference. Presiding Officer, remembrance alone is not enough. Justice must be pursued. Survivors must be supported, not with pity, but with purpose. And we must challenge the hatred that seeds such atrocities in Bosnia, in Europe, and wherever it may surface. Because the hard truth that we have to deal with is that for most of us in this chamber, this is an event that happened in our lifetimes, when the vow of a previous generation had been that such events would never occur in Europe again. Let this Parliament stand as one, saying never again, not in word alone, but in action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I now call Karen Adam to be followed by Paul O'Kane. Again, around 4 minutes, Ms Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to firstly begin by thanking my colleague Michelle Thompson for bringing this vitally important motion before Parliament today. The 30th anniversary of the genocide in Srebrenica is not only a time to mourn the 8,372 lives lost, it is a time to reflect on the responsibilities that we carry as parliamentarians, as educators and as human beings. We say never again, but that promise must live in action and not just in memory. Because genocide doesn't begin with weapons, it begins with words, dehumanisation, division and the slow erosion of empathy. Presiding Officer, it's in our schools, it's in our homes and it's in our institutions that we must build the resilience to resist it. And that's why I am proud today to make mention of the young people and their teachers of Banff Academy in my constituency. This year, 3 of their RMPS pupils received national recognition in the Beyond Srebrenica Schools competition for their powerful, compassionate writing about the genocide. Finlay in S4 was named the overall senior phase winner and will soon travel to Bosnia on a fully funded visit, including a trip to the Srebrenica Memorial Centre. Kellen and Nicholas, both in S3, were also highly commended. All 3 pupils and the staff who supported them are here in Parliament today, and I'm delighted to welcome them, along with other Banff Academy pupils who are here to celebrate and support each other's achievements. Earlier this year, Banff Academy also took part in a powerful international art project called Banff to Bethlehem, working with a Palestinian artist to explore themes of resilience and solidarity. The Banff Academy pupils' artwork was actually projected onto the separation wall in the West Bank. This is essential education with critical engagement. Teaching not just what it means to care, but what it means to act. In a year that marks both 80 years since VE Day and 30 years since the horror of Srebrenica, education like this couldn't be more vital. Schools do more than teach lessons. They ensure that fostering emotional intelligence, social responsibility and a deep understanding of justice is a part of our education system. Because after all, isn't that the most important education we could give our children? We have a moral duty not to look away from what has happened and what is happening in the world. The genocide in Srebrenica happened in plain sight, in a UN-declared safe zone, and it was made possible by years of hate speech, scapegoating and propaganda. The mothers of Srebrenica who have fought tirelessly for justice and recognition show us the enduring cost of silence and strength of truth. And I want to commend the work of Remembering Srebrenica and Beyond Srebrenica for preserving the truth and passing it on to future generations. Their efforts ensure that remembrance is not a relic of the past, but a living force that challenges hate wherever it surfaces. Because let's be clear, when they see the rise of the far-right rhetoric in the UK, when we witness ongoing atrocities around the world, including in Palestine, we must not lose our moral clarity. We do not meet hate with hedging. We meet it with courage and with conscience. True leadership is not found in dog whistles or division. It's found in the values that we pass to our children, in the stories that we choose to tell, and in the communities we choose to stand with. So, today, as we honour those who died in Srebrenica, we must also commit ourselves to the living, to stand up for truth, for dignity and for justice, because the greatest lesson to learn is ensuring that never again is not a phrase that we say, but a promise that we keep. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Adam. I now call Paul O'Kane, again around 4 minutes. Mr O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I begin by adding my thanks to Michelle Thompson for bringing this motion and this debate to Parliament today, and indeed for the way that I think we've engaged across parties in this chamber to ensure that this debate takes place today. And can I also pay tribute to the work of Beyond Srebrenica Scotland and the excellent work that they do, and indeed their chair, Sabina Carrick-McKenzie, for all of her efforts in ensuring that we protect the memory of Srebrenica and we educate people about what happened 30 years ago. And to that end, I would urge colleagues to join the events that we have in Parliament today. There will be a drop-in in the Fleming Room, where some of the young people that were referenced by Karen Adam will be there to talk to members, and indeed there will be a photograph outside at 2:15. So I do hope colleagues will be able to join us in those endeavours. Like Michelle Thompson, I was honoured to take part in a delegation to Bosnia-Herzegovina just in March, along with Siobhan Brown, the Minister, and many others from across public life in Scotland. And it really was one of the most profound things I've done as an MSP, and a great opportunity, as Michelle Thompson referenced, to understand and encounter with people who lived through those horrendous experiences 30 years ago. And each evening on that delegation, I tried to write something to try and capture my thoughts and my experiences. And what I intend to do with the time I have is just to read one of those reflections to colleagues that I wrote on the day we came back from Srebrenica. The sun is slowly dipping below the hill. There has been some warmth today, and all around are hints of spring. But as evening falls, there is a chill that seems to reach down to us from the mountains. Nizad has just finished speaking to us. He is framed by row upon row of white gravestones. He survived a mass execution as a child and walked with bullet wounds to his head and stomach for days to reach safety. He is a softly spoken man. He speaks calmly and generously answers our questions. He speaks about his daughters, who just yesterday played with Bosnian Serb girls in the local volleyball team. Despite the horrors done to him and to those he loved, he wants a better future for his children. A silent reverence lingers before we rise to walk one last time in the fading light around the thousands of graves, touching the names etched into the grey stone on the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial, each a son, a father, a brother, a husband. There is something incomprehensible here, something that makes me want to stay longer, to try to understand, to cry out, to do something, although nothing seems to meet the enormity. The journey here reminded us of the fragility of the peace agreement and the prevalence of denial of the genocide in the Republika Srpska. In each service station and each town, there would be people who had turned on their neighbours, people who had stayed silent in the face of what was happening, and people who even carried out those unspeakable acts. They are walking these roads, sipping coffee, watching our bus pass. We visited the Memorial Centre at the Battery Factory, which was a Dutch UN base at Potocari, and we retraced the footsteps of those days in July 1995. We were all rendered speechless by video footage of what happened after the UN allowed the Bosnian Serb forces to separate boys and men from women and girls. Promises of safe passage to free Bosnian territory were a lie. In the video, filmed by their executioners, we watched 6 men shot dead. The 2 youngest were spared until they had dragged the 4 bodies of their comrades into a shallow grave. There are no words. We all reach out to each other without speaking as we climb the stairs to meet the directors of the centre. Before we left, we met Mother Fadala. She speaks to us at her shop selling flowers, books and memorial items. Like all the mothers, she lost everything. The shop is her defiance, her reason to go on. The authorities of the Republika Srpska don't want her here, but this unassuming, smiling, small lady in her 80s is a rock, unmovable, strong. She tells us that soon she will travel to the United Nations in New York to call for the international community not to forget and to do more. This is what the mothers do. They stand because others can't. In the darkness of our journey back to Sarajevo, there is much to process. I think of the sun setting on those rows and rows of white stones and the words that are written in the books held in common by the Abrahamic faith. What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I now call on Siobhan Brown to respond to the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Firstly, can I just express my gratitude to Michelle Thompson for sponsoring today's motion. I'd also like to sincerely thank everyone who has kindly taken this opportunity to commemorate the 30th anniversary of Srebrenica genocide, which took place on the 11th of July, and also White Armband Day. I echo the heartfelt words offered by my fellow members in remembrance and recognition of the victims across Bosnia and Herzegovina, just as I did earlier this year when we came together to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Holocaust. Can I please also give a warm welcome to the gallery, the young people and their teachers from the Lessons of Srebrenica school competition. And I can also see Sabina Caddick-McKenzie, who graciously led myself and others on a delegation to Bosnia, and Barry Fisher, the Secretary for Beyond Srebrenica. Members will be aware that Paula Kane and Beyond Srebrenica have organised a drop-in session to raise awareness on White Armband Day this afternoon, and I will encourage members to attend if they can. There will also be a national commemoration of Srebrenica genocide in Glasgow on the 10th of July, and I hope to see as many members as possible at these important events. Can I thank members this afternoon for their very powerful contributions, and for those of us who have had the honour and the privilege to go on this delegation to Bosnia. I think we all agree that it was totally life-changing. It definitely was for me. White Armband Day, which will be commemorated on Saturday the 31st of May, provides an opportunity to recognise and honour the victims of the atrocities in Predjedor and the surrounding areas. It represents the enforcement of a decree issued on local radio compelling non-Serb citizens to wear a white armband and segregating them simply for who they were. At the UN's International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, witnesses from Predjedor shared that life was very hard. Our movements were restricted. If you went to buy anything in a shop, you had to wear a white armband. On the windows of our houses and apartments, we had to hang out white flags. The slow process of dehumanisation singled out many non-Serb citizens and set in motion heinous campaigns of brutality, violence and ethnic cleansing. Violence in the region continued to escalate, including concentration camps in the northwest, which were discovered and shared to the shocked world by journalists Ed Villami and Penny Marshall in the early 1990s. And in 1997, Ed Villami described a camp in Amasa as a dark inferno of mutilation, starvation, torture and murder. Predjedor is the site of one of the largest mass graves in Bosnia, where the bones of several hundred people were unearthed. And across Bosnia, 30 years later, there are still mothers and wives who have still not been reunited with the remains of their loved ones. In March, I had the privilege to join a delegation to Bosnia with the charity Beyond Srebrenica. The delegation underlined the importance of standing up to hatred, understanding and challenging the impact that prejudice can have, and building a cohesive and a resilient society. I travelled to Srebrenica and visited the cemetery in Potocari, the site of the graves of over 8,000 men and boys. There we heard from the survivors, Nedzad Advik and also Amasa Salihovic, who shared the terror, destruction and violence they endured. And in telling their experiences, it was like watching them relive every single moment of terror that they endured. It was a truly humbling experience. And despite the sheer inhumanity they described, they and many others showed remarkable resilience and commitment by returning to Srebrenica to preserve these memories and also to challenge and confront those who deny them. In the Memorial Centre, we saw hard-hitting real-life footage of the young men, some who I would call the boys at the age of my son, brutally beaten, carted onto a truck like animals before being lined up and shot. And this is the footage that Michelle Thompson referred to that was used in the court case and that Paula Kane referred to in his speech as well. We saw shoes and other belongings left behind us as people desperately attempted to flee to Tuzla, a journey later known as the Death March. Whilst the war is over, many of its scars remain. In 1984, Sarajevo hosted the Winter Olympics, and as part of our delegated guided tour, we visited the site of the old bobsleigh track, which was used during the Games. And on our descent down to Sarajevo city, we saw built-up areas where we were told snipers were positioned. And although this was 30 years ago, the evidence of the war is still ingrained in Sarajevo's everyday life. All around Sarajevo, the streets were damaged by historic artillery and bullet marks, and these were all painted red in remembrance of those that had lost their lives. We heard reflections from ordinary people on their extraordinary methods they take to protect themselves and their families, even to this day, 30 years later. And although some wounds deepen with time, there's also been a remarkable illustration of strength, resilience and hope. And we were very fortunate to be led by our guides, Suvad and Sabina, who shared their raw, personal experiences of the historical events with bravery and with grace. On our delegation, we visited many organisations. We had the honour of meeting the tour de force that is Bakira Hasaic, who established the Association of Women's Victims of War, a charity that brings together victims of sexual assault and holds perpetrators to account. We met with Zen za Zen, or Women for Women, founded in Bosnia to help women displaced by war. We met with the International Commission for Missing Persons, who were conducting DNA identifications and challenging the denial that continues 30 years later, and to find the remains of the 8,000 boys and men so they can be buried for their families. And a profound visit to the War Childhood Museum, archiving artefacts belonging to young children, encouraging us to confront the truths from the past, whilst instilling a sense of hope for a peaceful future. We are indebted to Beyond Srebrenica for their power of work that they do to educate and commemorate the genocide across Scotland. Presiding Officer, the delegation was an incredibly profound, moving and confronting experience that challenged all of us to bring home what we had seen and experienced. We must lead by example and remain ever vigilant. Days like White Armband Day are crucial to ensuring that the grave consequences of the past are never forgotten and should never be repeated. We are committed to combating all forms of hatred and prejudice, including through the delivery of our ambitious hate crime strategy. Preventative work that builds strong, respectful and cohesive communities can stop the narratives that foster prejudice from taking hold. The First Minister's gathering on strengthening and protecting democracy brought key members of our society together to agree a common approach to asserting the values on our country and creating a society where everyone can flourish. Let us challenge anyone who would deny those values and work cooperatively to stand against division. The Scottish Government will continue to do so. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2:30.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.